June 30th, 1908, 7:17 a.m. The Podkamennaya Tunguska River Basin in Siberia. The sky tore open. A fireball outshining the sun sliced through the atmosphere at a massive angle, followed immediately by a cataclysmic explosion that rewrote geophysical records. Modern conservative estimates place the energy released between 10 and 30 megatons of TNT, potentially peaking at 50 megatons. For physical context, that is the equivalent of detonating 1,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs simultaneously in the exact same location. An atmospheric gravity wave expanded outward at the speed of sound. Microbarographs at the UK Met Office recorded extremely rare low-frequency pressure fluctuations, a wave that circled the Earth twice before dissipating. Seismographs in Washington and London registered the tremors. Thousands of miles away in Europe, the blast ejected tens of thousands of tons of pulverized dust and ice crystals into the upper atmosphere, causing eerie white nights. Londoners recorded reading newspapers outdoors at midnight without artificial light. 65 kilometers from the epicenter, at the Vanavara trading post, resident S. Semyonov left a critical first-hand account. Following the flash of light came a violent blast of hot wind. My shirt felt like it was on fire. Then a deafening roar, and I was thrown several meters. In the core zone, over 830 square miles of Siberian taiga were instantly erased. 80 million trees snapped like matchsticks. By all known physics, a multi-megaton celestial strike guarantees a massive crater, miles wide and hundreds of feet deep. But the reality was completely anomalous. No crater. No giant meteorite debris. Not even a microscopic fragment of extraterrestrial rock. This is the Tunguska crime scene. The most terrifying display of physical destruction in human history left no weapon and not a single bullet hole. The investigation didn't happen immediately. A massive 19-year blind spot separates the blast from the first scientists reaching ground zero. This gap wasn't due to scientific arrogance, but brutal historical upheaval and geographical isolation. In the decades following 1908, the Russian Empire plunged into World War I, the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, and a savage civil war. With regimes collapsing and millions dying, no government had the resources or capital to investigate a loud noise in the Siberian wilderness. Beyond politics, the Siberian taiga is a natural fortress. The Tunguska region is a labyrinth of lethal swamps and permafrost. There is only a brief, agonizingly short window in late summer when waterways are navigable. Miss that window, and an expedition is buried forever by sub-zero temperatures and blizzards. It wasn't until 1927 that Soviet mineralogist Leonid Kulik, funded by the Soviet Academy of Sciences, mounted the first legitimate scientific expedition. Breaching the core was grueling. Kulik found the indigenous Evenki people paralyzed by fear. The blast had wiped out their livelihood, instantly incinerating or shock-killing thousands of their reindeer. Unable to process this supernatural level of destruction, the Evenki declared the epicenter a cursed zone, the wrath of the thunder god Ogdi, and flatly refused to act as guides. When Kulik's team finally forced their way into the epicenter through sheer endurance, the site shattered every assumption in contemporary geology. They didn't find the expected massive crater. Instead, they walked into a bizarre physical paradox. Tens of millions of trees on the perimeter had fallen in a highly precise, radiating butterfly pattern, with their roots pointing directly back to a single center point. But when the team reached that absolute center, the trees were standing up. At ground zero, the trunks hadn't fallen. Instead, the extreme, violent force had instantly stripped them of all bark, leaves, and branches. They stood silently in the permafrost, rows of charred, dead telegraph poles. This highly counterintuitive physical evidence fueled decades of pseudo-scientific hysteria. Without a conventional crater, tabloids weaponized theories that violated fundamental physics. First, the antimatter annihilation theory. In 1965, physicists proposed a chunk of antimatter struck Earth, cleanly annihilating upon contact with normal matter and leaving zero debris. This fails basic physics. Earth is wrapped in a thick atmosphere. Any antimatter object would begin annihilating the microsecond it hit the ionosphere. It would detonate hundreds of miles out in space. It could never penetrate down to the troposphere, just a few miles above Siberia. Next, the mini black hole theory. In 1973, it was suggested an atom-sized black hole shot through the planet. If true, its immense gravitational potential and velocity would mandate an exit wound on the opposite side of the globe, the North Atlantic. It would have triggered a mirrored explosion and an apocalyptic tsunami. The global meteorological and oceanographic networks of 1908 record the North Atlantic as dead calm. The most absurd is the Nikola Tesla death ray conspiracy, blaming an out-of-control wireless energy experiment at Wardenclyffe Tower in New York. Engineered reality check. Wardenclyffe's maximum output was a few hundred kilowatts, barely enough to power a modern shopping mall. Projecting millions of kilowatt hours halfway across the globe to trigger a multi-megaton blast doesn't just violate the conservation of energy, it shatters the physical limits of human civilization. Those upright, stripped death poles are not evidence of the supernatural. They are precise fluid dynamic markers. They reveal a cold physical reality. The energy source didn't come from below the ground, nor from the surface. It came from directly above. Modern physics cracked this open using supercomputer hydrocode simulations. Physicist Mark Boslow and his team at Sandia National Laboratories fed the Tunguska topography, treefall mechanics, and atmospheric density into their models. The only mathematical conclusion that matched the blast site was an airburst. When a multi-million-ton object, whether stone or iron, slams into Earth's atmosphere at 10 to 20 miles per second, the air ahead of it cannot move out of the way fast enough. This creates extreme ram pressure. The air compresses violently, spiking temperatures to tens of thousands of degrees, vastly hotter than the surface of the sun. Under this horrific aerodynamic stress and thermal shock, the object suffers catastrophic structural failure. Between 6 to 8 miles above the ground, right at the boundary of the troposphere and stratosphere, the Tunguska object disintegrated. But its massive momentum didn't vanish. The supercomputer models show that upon disintegration, the object's mass and velocity converted into a hyper-expanding, superheated gas. It formed a downward-firing, supersonic jet. Think of a cosmic blowtorch, miles wide, firing straight down at the Siberian taiga. At absolute ground zero, the hypervelocity shockwave hit vertically. The trees experienced pure downward pressure, which is why they didn't snap, but the supersonic blast wave instantly sheared off every branch and stripped the bark. Once that shockwave hit the bedrock, it had nowhere to go but outward, creating the horizontal, expanding ring of destruction that flattened 830 square miles of forest. So, it was an airburst. But if a massive asteroid exploded in the sky, where is the debris? The ground should be littered with thousands of tons of meteorite fragments. In the late 20th century, geologists stopped looking for giant craters and turned to microscopes. Extracting core samples from the peat bogs and preserved tree resin at ground zero, they finally found the smoking gun. They isolated shocked quartz containing planar deformation features, PDFs, alongside carbon spherules and melted titanomagnetite. Shocked quartz is the absolute fingerprint of extreme kinetic events. The internal crystal lattice is physically warped in a way that only happens at the epicenter of a nuclear detonation or a hypervelocity cosmic impact. This proved an asteroid was there, instantly vaporizing rock and fusing terrestrial dust into microscopic glass rain. This also killed the persistent conspiracy theory that the trees in Tunguska mutated and grew abnormally fast due to alien radiation. In 1990, strict dendrochronology, tree ring analysis, proved the rapid growth had zero to do with radiation. It was a brutal ecological reset. The blast blanketed the ground in millions of tons of nutrient-rich ash. The destruction of the forest canopy allowed massive sunlight to hit the floor, and the thermal flash melted the permafrost, flooding the soil with water. Ash, sunlight, and water triggered a massive, explosive botanical recovery. Strip away the clickbait garbage, and the puzzle pieces are actually hiding right there in Kulik's dead telegraph poles. Those upright, stripped trunks are the first physical key to unlocking the Tunguska event. Yet, the microscopic evidence couldn't solve the mass deficit. Where did the main body of the asteroid go? In 2020, a groundbreaking paper published in the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society by Daniil Krennikov's team finally closed the physics loop. They proposed a terrifying new model, the Grazing Impact Theory. Their supercomputer models revealed the object was not fragile stone or ice. It was a highly robust, pure iron asteroid, roughly 100 to 200 meters in diameter. More importantly, it was the trajectory. The iron asteroid did not plunge directly toward the surface. It sliced into the upper atmosphere at extreme speed and an incredibly shallow angle. It screamed through 400 miles of Earth's atmosphere. When it reached its lowest altitude, about 6 to 9 miles over Tunguska, the extreme ram pressure generated the megaton airburst that leveled the forest.
But because of its solid iron core, extreme velocity, and shallow entry angle, the asteroid survived the critical stress point. It did not fully vaporize. Like a flat stone skipping across a pond, the asteroid bounced. It rode the atmospheric friction, breached the stratosphere, broke free of Earth's gravity, and escaped back into the dark void of the solar system. This is the ultimate truth of Tunguska. This is why there are no large meteorites. The weapon that caused the largest explosive event in recorded history fired its shockwave, retained its core mass, and fled the crime scene. Tunguska is not a paranormal mystery. It is a terrifying archive of extreme astrophysics. Astronomers now know that every summer, Earth passes through the Beta Taurids, a debris stream left by comet Encke. On June 30, 1908, one massive fragment crossed our path. It was an exercise in pure cosmic probability. If that iron asteroid had entered at a slightly steeper angle, it would have impacted the surface, tearing the crust open. If it had arrived just a few hours later, the rotation of the Earth would have placed the capital of the Russian Empire, St. Petersburg, directly beneath the crosshairs. The Tunguska event proves there is no mercy in orbital mechanics. We survived 1908 because the bullet only grazed us. But the rocks are still out there, flying in the dark, governed by nothing but gravity and time.